The sound of medical machines marked the rhythm of my torment. Beep, beep, beep. A mechanical symphony that seemed to count the minutes I had left. Not of life, but of my marriage. I was lying in that cold hospital bed, with tubes invading my arms and an oxygen mask covering half of my face. The room smelled of antiseptic, illness, and something else. The almost imperceptible odor of the abandonment that was approaching. Antonia, the middle-aged nurse who had been taking care of me for 3 weeks, adjusted the IV silently. Her eyes avoided mine. She knew. Somehow she knew what was about to happen. I tried to speak, to ask, but my breath failed. Pneumonia had taken over my lungs so quickly that the doctors were still bewildered. 3 weeks ago, I was at home with a cough that seemed harmless. Now, each breath was a battle. The door opened without warning. Marcos came in, the man who had shared my bed for 7 years. My husband. He wasn't alone. A woman in a gray blazer accompanied him, carrying a black leather briefcase. A lawyer. My heart raced, and the monitors betrayed my anxiety with sharp alarms. "I just need a few minutes," Marcos said to Antonia, who rushed in upon hearing the alarms. She looked at me, hesitant, and I nodded. What choice did I have? Marcos didn't come near the bed. He stood by the door, keeping his distance as if my illness were contagious. Severe pneumonia. It wasn't contagious, but he acted as if it were. "I brought the papers," he announced coldly. "I thought it best to resolve this now." The lawyer approached, avoiding looking directly at me, as if I were too sad a spectacle to behold. She placed the documents on the small table beside the bed. Divorce. The black letters seemed to scream, even though I already knew what it was. 3 weeks hospitalized, and this was only the 3rd time he visited me. The first time was when they gave the diagnosis. The second was to pick up the keys to our apartment. And now, this. "Can you sign here?" The lawyer pointed to the lines marked with an X. Her voice was almost gentle, contrasting with Marcos's coldness. My hands trembled, not only from the weakness of the illness, but from the weight of that moment. I tried to remove the oxygen mask, but Antonia intervened. "Let me help," she said, adjusting the mask so I could speak. "Why now?" My voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible. "Couldn't you wait until I got better?" Marcos finally looked directly at me. Our eyes met for the first time in weeks. There was no love in that look, no pity. It was something worse, something I will never forget. "It sickens me to see you like this," he said, the words coming out like poison. "I can't take it anymore. This illness, this hospital, this version of you, version of me. As if I had chosen to get sick, chosen. As if I had decided that my lungs would fail, that I would need help to breathe, that my body would betray me in this way. Marcos, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I've already decided," he cut in. "I've signed my part. The house stays with me, as established in the prenuptial agreement. You keep your car and your personal belongings. No alimony. No additional division of assets." The lawyer seemed uncomfortable. She looked at the clock, then at Marcos, and finally at me. "Ma'am, if you prefer, we can come back another day." "No," Marcos interrupted. "We're resolving this today." I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain made me recoil. The pneumonia had affected my lungs severely. Every breath was a small victory. "You swore, in sickness and in health," I managed to say between labored breaths. Marcos let out a dry laugh. "That's for people who still have a real marriage. Ours ended long before this pneumonia." "Lie. We were fine. Not perfect, but fine. We had plans. A trip to Europe next year. Maybe kids after that. How could everything fall apart so quickly? It was her, wasn't it? I asked, knowing the answer. Melissa, his colleague at the office. He never admitted it, but I saw the messages, the late-night calls, the meetings that extended into the wee hours. Don't turn this into something it isn't, he replied, irritated. Our marriage was already dead. You know that. No, I didn't know. To me, we were just going through a rough patch. Married people do that. They fight. They persist. They don't run when things get complicated. Antonia, noticing my agitation, checked the monitors. Ma'am, you need to calm down. Your blood pressure is rising. How could I calm down? My husband was abandoning me in the hospital, saying he was disgusted with me, while I struggled to breathe. How does anyone stay calm in a situation like this? Just sign it, please, Marcos insisted. Don't make things more complicated. I wanted to scream, throw those papers in his face, tell him he was a coward, a traitor, but I didn't have the strength. My body wouldn't allow me that luxury. With trembling hands, I took the pen the lawyer offered. Antonia adjusted the bed so I could sit up a bit. The pain was intense, but less painful than the betrayal I was experiencing. Where? I asked, tears blurring my vision. The lawyer pointed to the lines, one by one. I signed mechanically without reading. What did it matter? He had already decided everything. It had always been like this. Marcos decided and I accepted, even when it hurt, even when it destroyed me inside. When I finished, the lawyer gathered the documents, organizing them in her briefcase. I'll leave a copy with you, she said, gently placing an envelope on the small table. Marcos was already at the door. He didn't even wait for confirmation that everything was signed. He turned his back, without looking at me one last time. Marcos, I called out, gathering my last bit of strength. Why? I always loved you. He paused for a moment, his hand on the doorknob. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would reconsider, that he would see the cruelty in what he was doing. But he just shook his head. Love is not enough. It never was. And he left, closing the door behind him. The lawyer mumbled an embarrassed, "I'm sorry," and also left, leaving me alone with the sound of the monitors and the crushing weight of abandonment. When they left, I let the tears flow freely. Antonia returned, worried about my vital signs spiking. Ma'am, you need to calm down, she repeated, adjusting the oxygen flow. How? I asked between sobs. How do I calm down when my life is over? She held my hand, offering a silent comfort that Marcos denied. Your life isn't over. It's just changing direction. At that moment, I didn't believe her. It felt like everything was over. My marriage, my dreams, my future, everything unraveling like sand through my fingers. The pneumonia had already taken so much from me. My independence, my health, my confidence. And now, Marcos was taking the rest. What would be left for me when I left that hospital? If I left, the doctors said that I was responding to the treatment, but slowly, very slowly. Complications after complications. First it was pneumonia, then a hospital infection, then pleurisy. My body seemed determined to betray me, just like Marcos. That night, I had a high fever. I was delirious, calling out for him, begging him not to leave me. The nurses exchanged pitying glances as they changed the sweat-soaked sheets. I was pathetic. A woman abandoned, sick, delirious for the man who said he felt disgusted by her. In the morning, when the fever subsided, a different nurse entered the room, older, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through to my soul. I heard what happened yesterday, she said, checking my vitals. I looked away, ashamed. The whole hospital must know by now. Hospitals are like small towns. News travels fast, she replied with a gentle smile. But that doesn't matter. What matters is how you're going to react to it. I'm not sure if I have the strength to react to anything right now. She adjusted my pillow, her movements precise but gentle. Strength comes when we need it, sometimes in the most unexpected way. 2 weeks had passed since Marcos signed the divorce papers and walked out of my life without looking back. 2 weeks of pain, not just physical, but a pain that penetrated to the core of my existence. My body was fighting off pneumonia, while my soul tried to process the abandonment. Teresa stayed by my side every day. She turned the uncomfortable hospital chair into her second home, leaving only to bathe at the nearby hotel and to make a few calls to check on her children. Her presence was a balm, but even she couldn't completely heal what was broken inside me. The doctors noticed a regression in my condition after the incident with Marcos. The fever returned, more persistent. My breathing, which had begun to improve, became laborious again. Tests showed that the infection in my lungs had spread. Emotional state directly affects recovery, explained Dr. Santos during the morning rounds, speaking as if I weren't present. We need to consider more intensive psychological support. I listened to everything with a strange sense of disconnection, as if they were talking about someone else. It was hard to believe that my body was reacting so intensely to Marcos's betrayal, as if it wasn't enough that he had taken my dignity, my marriage, and my dreams. He was now compromising my health as well. That same afternoon, I received a visit from Dr. Luciana, the hospital's psychologist. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calming presence. She pulled up a chair beside my bed and we began to talk. "Julia, Dr. Santos told me what happened," she said, direct but gentle. "Would you like to talk about it?" Part of me wanted to scream no, that I didn't want to relive that humiliating moment. Another part, however, longed to vent, to try to understand the incomprehensible. He said he was disgusted to see me like this. The words came out almost in a whisper. After 7 years together, how can someone say that to a person who is sick? Dr. Luciana observed me for a moment before responding. "What do you think that says about him, Julia?" The question caught me by surprise. I expected her to talk about overcoming the trauma, about moving on, the cliches I'd already heard from well-meaning friends who called after learning what had happened. But she was inviting me to reflect on Marcos, not on myself. "That he is cruel," I responded after a moment of reflection. "That he didn't really love me. That for him, our marriage was conditional." "And what does that say about you?" This question was even harder. That I was a fool, that I believed in empty promises, that I wasted 7 years of my life with someone who would abandon me at the first serious difficulty. Dr. Luciana shook her head slightly. "Another possible perspective is that you were loyal, committed, and believed in love. That doesn't make you a fool, Julia. It makes you someone capable of truly loving." Her words touched something deep inside me. Since Marcos abandoned me, I had blamed myself, questioned myself, belittled myself. What if true strength lay in my ability to love, not in the weakness of being abandoned? "But that doesn't change the fact that I'm alone now," I argued. "Sick, with no home to return to, with my life completely destabilized." "Yes, the situation is extremely difficult," agreed the psychologist. "But I want you to consider something. What Marcos did is a reflection of him, not of you. And your response to this situation will be a reflection of you, not of him. That session with Dr. Luciana was the first of many. 3 times a week, she would come to my room, and we would talk about the past, the present, and slowly, we began to talk about the future. A future without Marcos, but not necessarily a worse future. Physically, the recovery was slow and painful. The antibiotics were finally starting to work, but my lungs were compromised. Breathing was still difficult, and the simple act of walking down the hospital corridor left me exhausted. My body, once healthy and full of energy, seemed to have aged decades in just a few months. "It will take time," said the physical therapist during a particularly challenging session as I struggled to complete the breathing exercises. "But each day, you get a little bit stronger." The same thing could be said about my emotional state. There were days when I woke up feeling an overwhelming weight on my chest, not because of the pneumonia, but because of the pain of rejection. Days when Marcos' words, "It makes me sick to see you like this," echoed in my mind like a condemning sentence. Days when I looked at myself in the hospital bathroom mirror and barely recognized the pale and dejected woman staring back at me. But there were also moments of clarity, of growing strength. Moments when I realized that maybe, just maybe, the end of my marriage wasn't the end of my story. In one of those moments, I received an unexpected visit. Deborah, my colleague and friend, appeared with a bouquet of flowers and a genuinely concerned expression. "Sorry I didn't come sooner," she said, placing the flowers on the small table next to the bed. "I was traveling for work and only found out about everything when I got back." Deborah not only knew about my hospitalization, but also about the divorce. The news spread quickly among our mutual friends, some of whom had taken sides, most in my favor, but surprisingly, some on Marcos's side. "How are you dealing with all this?" she asked, sitting in the chair that Teresa usually occupied, who had gone out for lunch. "One day at a time," I replied honestly. "Some days are terrible, others are just bad." She smiled sympathetically. "And work? Have you been thinking about it?" I hadn't, really. My job as a marketing manager at a cosmetics company seemed to belong to another life, to a different Julia, a healthy, married, confident Julia. "I think I'm going to need more medical leave," I replied, uncertain. "I don't know when I'll be ready to go back." Deborah nodded, understanding. "The boss gets it. We're all rooting for you." Then hesitantly she added, "You heard about Marcos and Melissa, right?" My heart sank painfully. "What's about them?" Deborah bit her lip, clearly regretting having brought up the subject. "Nothing, just they're together now, officially. I thought you already knew. The news shouldn't have been a surprise." I had suspected the affair for months, and the speed with which Marcos wanted the divorce only confirmed my suspicions. Still, hearing that they were officially together, while I was still struggling to breathe properly, felt like a punch in the stomach. "How long?" I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. "Julia, I don't think it matters now." "How long, Deborah?" I insisted. She sighed. "From what they say, about 8 months." 8 months. That meant Marcos had been having an affair long before my hospitalization. The entire narrative he had created, that our marriage was already over, that my illness only precipitated the inevitable, was a convenient lie to alleviate his guilt. Strangely, this revelation brought a clarity I didn't expect. It wasn't about me being sick. It wasn't about me not being enough. It was about Marcos being unfaithful, selfish, and cowardly long before I set foot in that hospital. "You know something, Deborah?" I said, feeling a surprising calm wash over me. "I think Marcos did me a favor." She looked at me confused. A favor? Yes. He showed who he really is before I wasted more years of my life with someone who didn't deserve me. The words came out with a conviction that surprised us both. It was as if, in that moment, something changed inside me. The pain didn't disappear, far from it, but it seemed less paralyzing, less defining. After Deborah left, I reflected on our conversation. Marcos and Melissa were together now, probably living in the apartment that was once my home, sleeping in the bed I shared with him for 7 years. The image hurt, of course, but it didn't destroy me as it would have weeks ago. Teresa returned from lunch and immediately noticed something different in my expression. "What happened?" she asked, always perceptive. I told her about Deborah's visit and the revelation about Marcos and Melissa. "That scoundrel," Teresa cursed, indignant. I always knew something was off with him. The way he looked at other women, as if it was his right. "You never liked him, did you?" I asked, realizing something that had always been there, but that I had never wanted to see. "I tried for you," Teresa admitted, "but I always thought you deserved someone better, someone who really saw you." 3 months after the divorce, I stumbled upon Marcos at the supermarket. I was in the checkout line when I saw him, a few people ahead. My first instinct was to run, but something kept me firmly in place. Perhaps pride, perhaps the need to prove, mainly to myself, that I could face this moment. When he saw me, his face lost color. For a second I thought he would also run, but instead, he approached hesitantly after paying for his groceries. "Julia," he said, as if testing whether he still had permission to say my name. "You look good." I looked at him, really looked. The man I once thought was my lifelong partner. The man who said he was disgusted by me when I was struggling to breathe. He looked older, tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. I didn't feel satisfaction seeing this, just a strange neutrality. "I'm better," I replied simply. It was true. My lungs were not fully recovered, but I could already walk without getting so tired. The doctor said I was a medical miracle, considering the severity of the pneumonia I had. "I heard you're staying at your sister's house," he commented, uncomfortable. "If you need anything—" "I don't need anything from you, Marcos," I interrupted, my voice calm, not out of control, but because I genuinely no longer felt that burning rage that consumed me in the first few months. "I will never need you again." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand." "No, you don't understand," I said, my voice still controlled. "You don't understand what it's like to have someone who promised to be by your side in sickness and in health look at you and say they're disgusted. You don't understand what it's like to be abandoned when you most need support. And I sincerely hope you never understand, because I wouldn't wish that pain on even my worst enemy." Marcos lowered his eyes, the shame evident on his face. "There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret what I said." "Good for you," I replied, placing my groceries on the conveyor belt. "I hope that regret makes you a better person. For the next time." He stood still for a moment, as if waiting for something else. Forgiveness, perhaps, or an outburst of anger, but I had nothing left to give him. Not even my anger was worth spending. "I think it's best that I go," he finally said. "Yes, it is better." He turned to leave, but stopped and looked at me again. "Melissa is pregnant," he said, like someone confessing a sin. I felt a tightness in my chest. It wasn't jealousy or envy. It was something more complex. Maybe mourning for the children I planned to have with him and never will. "Congratulations," I managed to say. "I hope you are a better father than you were a husband." He winced at my words. but nodded before finally leaving. I finished paying for my groceries with slightly trembling hands, but maintained my composure until I reached the car. Only then, alone, did I allow a few tears to fall. I didn't cry because I wanted Marcos back. I cried for what could have been, for the plans we made together, for the family we envisioned building, for the version of my life that would have existed if he had been the man he promised to be. When I arrived at Teresa's house, she immediately noticed that something had happened. "What is it?" she asked, concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I ran into Marcos at the supermarket," I replied, placing the bags on the table. "Melissa is pregnant." Teresa muttered a low curse, quickly glancing at the children in the living room to make sure they hadn't heard. "How are you feeling?" she asked, holding my hand. I thought for a moment. "Honestly, I'm fine. It's strange, but I don't feel devastated. Maybe sad for what could have been, but not wanting to go back." Teresa hugged me tightly. "You're stronger than you think, you know?" That night, lying in the guest room bed that had been my refuge for the past few months, I reflected on the encounter with Marcos, on how I had remained firm, dignified, on how I hadn't begged, shouted, or fallen apart. Small victories, as Dr. Luciana would call them. That unexpected conversation served as a catalyst. The next morning, I made a decision I had been putting off, to find my own place to live. Teresa and João had been incredibly generous in taking me in, but I needed to rebuild my independence. "Are you sure?" Teresa asked when I told her my plans. "You know you can stay here as long as you need." "I'm sure," I replied. "You gave me the safe space I needed to recover. Now I need to create my own space." With João's help, I began looking for apartments to rent. Something small, cozy, not too far from Teresa's house. After visiting several places, I found a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it had abundant natural light and a small balcony where I could grow plants, something I had always wanted to do, and Marcos never supported, complaining about the mess the plants would make. On moving day, Teresa, João, and even the kids helped organize my few belongings. Most of the things I shared with Marcos were left behind. I didn't want to carry memories of that life. "Welcome to your new home," Teresa said, handing me a plant in a colorful pot. "Your first green baby." I smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me, you silly. That's what sisters are for." That first night alone in my new apartment was both scary and liberating. The silence was strange after months in Teresa's noisy house. Every creak, every sound from the street made me stay alert. But there was also a sense of accomplishment. This was my space, my fresh start. As I arranged the few books I had brought on the small shelf, I found something I didn't remember packing: our wedding album. Teresa must have placed it among my things, perhaps thinking I would like to have it. I sat on the newly bought sofa and opened the album. There I was, radiant in my white dress. There was Marcos, smiling as if he were the happiest man in the world. There were our families, our friends, all celebrating what we believed was the beginning of a life together. Strangely, I didn't feel the sharp pain I expected. Instead, I looked at the photos with an almost clinical detachment. Those people in the photographs seemed like strangers now, acquaintances from a former life. I closed the album and put it in a box I decided to keep in the back of the closet. Not to revisit constantly, but to remember where I came from, to remember what I survived. In the following weeks, I established a new routine. I worked remotely during the morning, did physiotherapy in the afternoon, and at night, I dedicated myself to discovering who Julia was outside of a relationship. I tried cooking dishes that Marcos hated. I painted a wall in the apartment turquoise blue, a color he would have despised. I started practicing yoga, something he always ridiculed. Small acts of self-discovery, of reaffirmation. They were far from compensating for the pain of abandonment, but each one of them brought me a step closer to a new version of myself. In one of my follow-up appointments, Dr. Santos expressed surprise at my recovery. "Your lungs are responding exceptionally well," he said, analyzing my exams. "Your oxygen saturation is almost normal. You've been following the treatment strictly, haven't you?" "Yes," I replied, "and I've also started yoga. It helps with breathing." He smiled. "Excellent initiative. Emotional state directly affects physical recovery, as you know, and you seem lighter." It was true. Although there were still difficult days when Marcos's cruel words echoed in my mind, days when loneliness weighed heavily, I was learning to navigate them without sinking. Dr. Luciana, with whom I continued sessions even after being discharged, also noticed the changes. "You are building your resilience," she said in one of our conversations. "It doesn't mean the pain has disappeared. It means you are learning to carry it without letting it define who you are." 6 months after the divorce, I received an unexpected invitation. It was an email from my company's HR department, inviting me to the year-end party. I hesitated. The idea of facing a social event, answering questions about my health, my divorce, was intimidating. But it was also an opportunity to reconnect with an important part of my identity. If this moved you, the next video will move you even more. Click here and continue with me.